This has been a place of military importance for 200 years. All the wood was taken down. It was magnificent sheltered coastal forest here of beech and oak and hemlock and pine and spruce, typical coastal sheltered forest. But the wood had to come down. The wood had to come down for several reasons. People need to use it, to build things with, and to burn for fuel, and to be able to see. Military communications were by sight. The forest grew back, mostly as mature, well, ultimately mature white pine and red spruce. That was the predominant vegetation here, with a mix of a whole bunch of other stuff like red maple, white birch, and various other things. And people planted a whack of trees in here. There are 15 non-native species in the park of trees. Okay, so that's brown spruce longhorn beetle. Then 2003 September, Hurricane 1 peppered up the coast. It hit us smack on here in Halifax and knocked down about 3/4 of the park's 100,000 mature trees. So it's about 65 hectares forested, maybe 70, I'm not exactly sure. 100,000 trees, most of it down. And immediately they shut off the park. Nobody's allowed in anymore because there was a thatch 3 meters, 4 meters high of trunks. Task force was put in place to figure out how to rehabilitate, how to clean up the park. I was part of that task force. Kevin Keys was on that task force, a few other folks from around town. And the cleanup started in January of 2004. By May of 2004 it was finished, and in June let people back in. And folks came in and looked at the park and said, holy mackerel, is that what this looks like when there are no trees on the landscape? For me, the feeling was that the park became incredibly smaller because of the hurricane. When you had the mature trees there, you never knew how close you were to the ocean. And all of a sudden, you'd come to the center of the park and you could see ocean in all directions except behind you. And it just looked very small. We have basically said that as a matter of principle, non-native species are not welcome here anymore. But there are several exceptions to that rule. One exception is the copper beech, for a couple of reasons. One is we have beech bark disease in Nova Scotia, and few, if any, beeches can reach mature size anymore because of the beech bark disease, which came into Canada in Halifax on a tree planted in the public gardens and is now as far west as Georgian Bay. Eastern white cedar is a species at risk in this province, at the lowest level of being at risk, so there's a conservation plan. This is not a cedar ecosystem, or not a cedar site, but somebody put a few cedars here and they're doing okay. Do people know this one?
Knotweed.
Japanese knotweed. Highly invasive, extremely difficult to eradicate.
Why is it there?
Well, because somebody thought it was cute to plant. One of the key issues in the park is shoreline instability, and we're at a place of shoreline instability here. 30 years ago, it was possible to drive a half-ton truck on this side of the anchor on grass. So we've had shoreline recession here, and to protect this anchor, all these big rocks have been put in. Who knows how long that will last. The situation is exacerbated by two things. One is sea level rise due to thermal expansion due to climate change, which will bring that sea up at least 50 centimeters over the next century. And the other is the fact that the land is subsiding into the crust of the earth at a rate of 30 centimeters per century. So we're going to have a new equilibrium here develop of at least a meter, something like a meter over the next century. So the problem is just going to keep on poking at us. This is called Heather Way, but it's actually a beach alley, this road. And we lost a few beaches over time, 1 or 2 during the hurricane. But the road is being managed to come back to be a Copper Beech alley. So these 2 were put in a few years ago. If you look up this way, you see 4 in a row here, or 3 in a row. Here's the beach here, a natural one. And there's another one there. So the idea is to get the beach alley back. Most of it was deep woods. You wouldn't have known you were 100 meters from the ocean walking here before the hurricane. So this is a pretty serious disease. The European beech is resistant, so these beeches are not susceptible. The second reason is that people have come to adore the copper beeches. They really love them and know of them as something special. So we don't want to piss people off by removing the copper beeches. So copper beech is fine, but this species is not fine. We have a lot of it, and it's invasive, and it needs to go. So we need to be more aggressive on this one. We're not going to take down the mature individuals. We're going to prevent long-term establishment of the regen. So the plan says every few years get somebody in with snippers or saws and nip out all of the Scots pine regen. We are declaring as aggressive a war on Norway maple, which is established in the park and is naturalized in several places. And then a lot of the other non-native species are not invasive. There's a couple of Douglas fir, a couple of horse chestnuts, a couple of English oaks, or maybe more than a couple, and they're just happily living out their life. Blair Party of Parks Canada and I asked for a blowdown demonstration site. All we could get was this. It's 20 meters by 60 meters. We wanted more, but this is what they would give us. And they wanted it in the south end of the park in case it caught on fire, and then it wouldn't run into the homes. It would have a lot of park to go through before it got there. So the chainsaws actually got in here and cut a few logs, but then somebody caught them and said, "Get out, that's our leave block." So you can see it much better if we just walk in here at how the thatch of logs is starting to come down to the forest floor. 8 years ago, this was standing up at about 3 meters high. And now it's down to about a meter. There's probably 250 to 300 cubic meters per hectare of coarse woody debris in here. And so what I say on the recorded file is that we wanted people to be able to watch the decomposition take place and the regeneration take place right up through the decomposition. Of course, this was not planted, but as you can see, we're not short of trees. If you were in the business of growing timber, you might not be proud of this, but we're not. This is a park, and so tree cover is here. You don't need to clean up the woods to get regeneration. As you walk through the park, you will notice that there's an abundance of snags. The policy is to leave snags entirely alone if they are not a danger, if parts fell out of them, to folks walking on the paths. If they are a danger close to the path, we will do to the snags what we've done with this one. So the finer parts out of the top have been taken down, but the most ecologically most important part of a snag is the big wood, standing up. So the birds get at them, cut their holes in them, and there you got nests and so on. So this snag was treated in that fashion, but you can see at the base it's starting to get a little weak, and so that snag may need to be taken down pretty soon, so it's not a hazard. But throughout the park you'll see snags treated this way if they are along the path.
Is there like a whole committee that decides if
I did not want any trees planted in the park on account of the hurricane and the blowdown, because we had enough propagules in here anyway. Where we were missing trees on the landscape, we could well have picked some up where they were too dense and moved them over. My opinion did not prevail, and a major planting program was mounted using money that was specifically earmarked for silviculture and restoration. So we planted in 2007-2008 101,000 trees in here. When they decided to do the plant, I thought, well, the influence I can have is on the selection of species. So I did look over the species list for the 4 plants, spring, fall, 2007-2008. And the range of species we put in here is just phenomenal. So one of the ideas was to not make this an arboretum, but to try to get better representation of all the species represented in the wild forests of Nova Scotia. So there's very little eastern white cedar in here, And although it's not an eastern white cedar ecosystem, we put a bunch in. We put larch in, we put black ash in. We also, in anticipation of climate change, planted a fair number of propagules of 3 species that grow in the St. John River Valley, and they are therefore considered to be Acadian forest species, but are not native to Nova Scotia. It's a little bit warmer in the St. John River Valley. Those are silver maple, American basswood, and butternut have been planted here. So anyway, we've got 101,000 trees planted, and probably, I don't know, a quarter of them, half of them at best will survive. Why? Because the natural regeneration is so lush. At the time of the hurricane and after the cleanup, there was not a tree through this valley. Nothing. And most of this is natural regeneration, mostly the broadleaves, but 8 years of healing can do wonders. You don't have to plant trees to get trees. Canadian land wants to grow trees, except in the prairies and the high Arctic, of course. This is not pavement, this is bedrock. This is not included in the lease of the Crown land to the city. This is a National Historic Site of Canada, so Parks Canada is in charge of this tower, which was built 213 or so years ago. It's a munitions dump or compound, but it's the last bastion of defense too. So if the guys down at the ocean shore in the battery weren't doing so well, they'd come up to the Cambridge battery, and if that started to fail, they'd come up and they'd pile in here. They never had to do that because there was never any fighting on this property. I don't know if the original design called for a roof, but a roof was put on this in the late 19th century, and a family actually lived in it for 30 years into the early 20th century. Then they abandoned, and the roof seems to have been abandoned. And this is what we have left. It's open in July and August for people to want to look in. It's not much to see other than clammy rock, concrete.
I've been to the one so far.
Yeah. So that's our Prince of Wales Tower National Historic Site.
No, so far.
The folks at Department of Natural Resources undertook a quick and dirty ecosystem classification. And I think most of the park typed out as oak white pine ecosystem, but I think without visiting the park, they nailed this little swale here as a sugar maple ash grove, and they're right. Here's the only sugar maple in the park of this size. This one right here, not in very good condition. And the big trunk in there is an ash, and it has no top, so it's not in very good condition either. Norway maple has taken over this grove, and so we probably need to get in here again and take out the Norway maple regen and see if we can't get some sugar maple and ash going. Since the time this landscape was occupied by Europeans, the idea was to run water off the landscape. But naturally, we'd have way more wetland here than we have now, because there were no drains before the folks came here. So on a road like this, during a big rain like yesterday, you can get quite a flow of water through here. And so they're always constantly pouring rocks into these waterways. I was hoping that we could encourage some re-engineering of the roads and pathways to get more water to stand in the landscape, but that fell on deaf ears too, so I didn't win that one either.